Amen. Ecclesiastes chapter 10. The chapter is dealing with proverbs concerning wisdom and foolishness. Proverbs concerning wisdom and foolishness are found within Ecclesiastes chapter 10. When you look at verse 1, it says, "Dead flies putrefy the perfumer's ointment, and cause it to give off a foul odor. So does a little folly to one respected for wisdom and honor." Now, what is the message of verse 1 there? What's it saying to us?
Makes me think of 1 Corinthians 14 or 15 says bad company corrupts good morals.
Right.
I don't know if it's
Bad company corrupts good morals, 1 Corinthians 15. Well, think about what he's talking about here in verse 1. Dead flies putrefy the perfumer's ointment. You have an ointment that is supposed to be good and beneficial and smells good, and you get dead flies in it, and it ruins it. It's useless at that point, and it gives off a foul odor. Well, a perfumer's ointment is supposed to give off a good odor. It's supposed to be something that's good and beneficial. Yes? Right. 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 The dead flies can ruin the perfumer's ointment like folly. The folly is parallel to the dead flies. To one respected for wisdom. You see one respected for wisdom if he does something that's folly, which would be foolish. What happens? He loses credibility. He loses the respect that he had. There are preachers that I know that were outstanding preachers, and because of sin in their life that they've repented of, have not been able to regain the respect that they had before they committed their sin. And they've repented of their sins. It's cost them dearly because of their sin, whether it's infidelity to their spouse or whatever. They've repented of it. They're sorry for it. According to the Bible, they're forgiven of it. But their reputation's ruined. And they are not asked to preach anywhere as a result of that thing that they did, the folly. It only takes a little. What's it say in 1 Corinthians chapter 5? A little leaven leavens the whole lump. Only a little. Now, I want you to think, I'm going to give you a name, and I want you to tell me the first thing that comes to your mind when I say this name. Richard Nixon. Scandal. Watergate. So that's what you remember, first thing. But what about all the good he did? He opened up, to China. There was a lot of good that he did in his presidency. But it's overshadowed by the Watergate scandal. And immediately his name is associated with that folly. And, of course, he resigned from office. And so you have that as a remembrance of him, that this ruined, any good that he did has been ruined by that folly that he involved himself with. And so that's why we have to be careful that we stay away from folly, even a little bit of folly. I mean, you go back to the whole concept of politicians. Politicians, a little bit of folly in their past can come back and haunt them. And sometimes that's part of the mudslinging that goes on when candidates are running for office. People will go into the past and, well, when you were 20 years old, you had a DWI. Well, he's 64 years old now, and he's a good citizen, but they want to go back to what he did. Look at this lawbreaker. Look at this guy. He's out of control. He had a DWI when he was 20. It may have been his only traffic violation ever. It was a bad thing, of course. He regrets it, and he's never done it since. But they'll go back and they'll capitalize on that to try to ruin him. So that's the problem with a little bit of folly. It can cause a person to want to be ruined who is respected for wisdom and honor. And that's the problem sometimes of putting people on too high of a pedestal. People will disappoint you. And it doesn't matter how respected and honorable they are, they have things in their life that will be disappointing. And so that's why we shouldn't have a focus on people, on a person, and idolize a person. We should have our focus on Christ, and there's no folly there. There's no folly with the Lord. The Lord's church, again, that's the problem that so many people have. Some people leave the church because they get disillusioned because they look at the brethren and they see folly. And so they get disillusioned with religion altogether and they walk away from it. And what they have to realize is it's going to happen. There's going to be some problems with the disciples of Christ because they're human and they're trying their best. Our focus needs to be on the one who never committed folly. And we need to strive towards that and help others strive towards that goal of following his example. Verse 2 of Ecclesiastes 10, which is dealing with, the whole chapter is dealing with proverbs concerning wisdom and foolishness. A wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart is left-handed. So if you're left-handed, you're a fool. Any left-handed people here? No, he's not dealing with literal what hand you write with or what hand. He's dealing with direction here. The right hand has oftentimes in the Bible been associated symbolically with strength and blessing. You find that in Exodus 15 and verse 6, Psalm 16 and verse 11, Isaiah 41 and verse 10. And sometimes the left hand is correspondingly has a negative symbolism to it. Genesis 48 and verse 14 and Judges 3 and verse 15. And it's not dealing with the literal direction of or what hand you use. It's dealing with the direction of your heart and what you're going to focus your life upon. Foolishness, folly, or are you going to focus your life upon things that are contrary to what is right? When you look into the New Testament, you see Jesus is at what hand of the Father? The right hand. He's ascended to the right hand of the Father in heaven. Place of honor, place of respect.
The judgment day in Matthew 25, the right hand where all the saved will be.
Very good. Matthew chapter 25 deals with the concept of the right hand are the saved and the left hand are the lost. That's a good point. I hadn't even tied into this, but that's good. So he's not dealing with literal what hand you use, but the concept of left and right. And do we not also in our culture use left and right to denote different concepts, right wing or left wing philosophies in politics and such?
Like you're eating, when after you're done, it's you're all right.
Right. Yeah, you're all right. Not all left. And also the New Testament talks about the right hand of fellowship, extending the right hand of fellowship to your brethren. So that concept is there. Verse 3, even when a fool walks along the way, he lacks wisdom, and he shows everyone that he is a fool. If the spirit of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your post. For conciliation pacifies great offenses. Verse 3 there, when the fool walks along the way, he lacks wisdom. This is a foolish individual. And it's very open and obvious to everyone that he is a fool. Foolishness is something that is obvious in a fool's life, is basically what he's saying there. And in verse 4, he's dealing with don't leave your post when the ruler rises against you, there in verse 4, and dealing with the concept of some can translate that as healing health or pacifying great offenses. Do not leave your post. You stand your ground. And the concept there, I think, is dealing with respect as well. Dealing with the spirit of that ruler that rises against one. I mean, that's the information I came across in trying to interpret that verse. Beginning in verse 5, there is an evil I have seen under the sun, as an error proceeding from the ruler. Folly is set in great dignity, while the rich sit in a lowly place. I have seen servants on horses, while princes walk on the ground like servants. Solomon here is, again, talking about sometimes things are topsy-turvy in this world. And he's dealing with the concept of the evil that's done under the sun. Error proceeding from a ruler. Folly is set in dignity, while the rich sit in lowly places. Great dignity there in verse 6, or an exalted position. Folly is set in an exalted position. Normally that would be in a lowly position, but sometimes folly is set in with great dignity in an exalted position, while the rich sit in lowly places. You have the rich in lowly places, and the places of humility. So again, that sometimes in life things seem to be backwards. That's what he's dealing with there, as he perceives it under the sun. There in verse 7, he goes on to explain that. I've seen servants on horses. Usually the servants are on the ground walking, while the princes walk on the ground like servants. Usually the princes are on the horses, and the servants are on the ground walking. So he has seen some. He's saying what he's observed and what he's seen are things are not always what they are normally appear to be. And so there's things that are topsy-turvy. And he talked about that earlier in the book, and how the basic premise of that is sometimes life isn't fair. And things don't go the way that we think things should go. And he's dealing with that there. Verses 8 through 10. He who digs a pit will fall into it. Whoever breaks through a wall will be bitten by a serpent. He who quarries stones may be hurt by them, and he who splits wood may be endangered by it. If the axe is dull and one does not sharpen the edge, then he must use more strength, but wisdom brings success. Look at verse 8. Don't we use this in our society as a saying? You've fallen into the pit you've dug for yourself. That concept. He who digs a pit will fall into it. So that concept of what you find in Galatians chapter 6, you reap what you sow. That concept that's found there. Galatians 6, verse 7 and 8. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. For he who sows to the flesh will of the flesh reap corruption. But he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. So that concept of sowing and reaping is being found here in Ecclesiastes 10 and verse 8. He who digs a pit will fall into it. And whoever breaks through a wall will be bitten by a serpent. Walls that are broken through, sometimes the snakes are in the walls. You break through it, you're going to get bitten. In other words, actions have consequences. They have consequences, and sometimes they have negative consequences in our life. And sometimes those negative consequences and problems that we have in our life are our own doing. We are the one that dig the pit. We are the one that break through the wall, and we have to suffer for it. I can honestly tell you that the majority of the problems that I have faced in my life are because of poor choices on my part or because of sin in my life. Now, there's a few exceptions to that. But the majority of the problems I've faced are my own fault. Whether it be poor choices. Now, not all poor choices are sins. All sins are poor choices. But not all poor choices are sins. Or because of sin. Because you reap what you sow. And the problems that I face, the stresses in my life, I brought upon myself, for the most part. So I have no one else to blame. And that concept is there. You dig the pit, you fall into it. You break through the wall, the serpent's there to bite you. Right. He built the very contraption that he was going to die on. That's a very good point. I hadn't tied into this. Very good point. So the concept of, it comes back on you, whatever you face. And of course, that whole sowing and reaping concept is there. Then in verse 9 and 10, he talks about the danger of certain things and how we are to have wisdom. He who quarries stone may be hurt by them, and he who splits wood may be endangered by it. There are certain occupations that are dangerous. Quarrying stone, which was something that happens today with machinery, but men themselves quarried stone in the ancient world, and it could be a very dangerous occupation. The very occupation you engage in can be detrimental to you. That's what he's saying here. And the splitting of wood. No one goes out in the forest to split wood and say, I think I'm going to sever a limb today. No one plans that. They go out to split wood, but it can be dangerous. But then in verse 10, he talks about wisdom. Here's the difference. Verse 10, Ecclesiastes 10 and verse 10 is a perfect verse that describes the difference in knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge says, for me to cut wood, I have to have an axe. That's knowledge. Wisdom says, I need to sharpen it so I can split wood more effectively. That's wisdom. So Ecclesiastes 10 verse 10 shows knowledge and wisdom together. Yes, I need this to do this, but I have to use more strength if it's dull. And wisdom brings success, so I better sharpen it so I won't have to use so much strength. Plus, what do they always tell you? A dull knife or a dull axe head is dangerous. It's dangerous. It can hurt you because of how much more energy you must exert in using it, and you could hurt yourself. Work smarter, not harder. That's a good part. That's a good thing to take from this. I mean, you cut down on a lot of time wasted, product wasted. Yes. Exactly. What's the saying with carpenters? Measure twice, cut once. That's wisdom. Knowledge says I need to measure this to get the right length. That's knowledge. Wisdom says I better do it twice, double check it to make sure I got it, and I'll cut it once. So there's a difference in knowledge and wisdom. And yeah. Yes, Robert. Yes. No, it's true. It's true. And that goes back to all of us listening to our parents when they gave us good advice and good instruction on how to behave, and we've ignored it and we dug our own pit and fell in it because we didn't listen. Simple instructions. Right. Gwen hates getting spankings. She knows behavior that will give her spankings, but she will do it anyway. She's such a stubborn little girl. And I've said this before, she's received more spankings than the other two combined. But oh, if we can get that mind focused in the right direction, she's going to be a force to be reckoned with when she grows up. But that's that training up in the child in the way they should go. Focusing that. Because stubbornness is a good thing in the right area. When it comes to the Lord and doing what's right, we should be stubborn in a righteous way. So this is so practical here in verse 10, dealing with if the axe is dull, one does not sharpen the edge, then he must use more strength. That's common sense. But wisdom brings success. It brings about a successful advantage. And so when you have in the workforce, I mean, you think about this just when it comes to being in the workforce, how much time is wasted and how much product is wasted as a result of folly and as a result of not using wisdom. But at the same time, they have the knowledge of doing certain things, but they don't have the wisdom. Perhaps they lack experience. And a lot of wisdom comes from experience. Right.
Waste a lot of time and quote unquote wisdom on one particular job rather than finding a job that's suited for them.
Right. I mean, the concept of using wisdom and picking what you want, doing what you want for a career is definitely there, and having your priorities in the right place, and having options open of other things. You know, if this doesn't work out, then I have this. You know, that's kind of that concept as well. There's just a tremendous amount of lessons there, you know, as far as the workplace, relationships, using wisdom and knowledge. You know, 1 Peter chapter 3 talks about dwelling with your spouse with understanding. Men are to dwell with their wives with understanding. So that concept of knowing certain things and having wisdom is very applicable.
I think looking at this though, it makes me think of the fact that when he points out that, you know, problems going to happen. You have the chance of things happening, even though you're wise. You know, you can be wise and sharp in your axe and still have an accident, or a tree fell the wrong way, or a rock, whatever. And because sometimes I find myself thinking, was this not a wise decision? Did I not think this through? When even though you did think it through and you did make provision, something bad still can happen from it. But that doesn't mean you didn't use wisdom in the decision.
Right.
You know, there's still going to be
Well,
there's
yes.
going to be things that might go wrong. That doesn't mean that you're necessarily being foolish either.
Yeah, verse 9 is basically saying what you're saying there, that there are certain things that are dangerous in and of themselves. You know, quarrying stone or splitting wood has the potential of danger. But verse 10, you minimize that danger by using wisdom. Using wisdom.
Also minimize it by using prayer and
Oh, yes.
knowledge and wisdom and understanding. It's like, you know, we just went on the road trip yesterday and we all buckled up. We all put our seatbelt on. But that didn't mean, you know, we could have still gotten into an accident.
Right.
And a fatal thing. So it's a constant being praying for that, for knowledge and wisdom and understanding.
Exactly. I mean, it's, you know, get down on the road can be a dangerous thing. I mean, being safe, being aware of things. I mean, you get into driving, the whole concept of, you know, being taught how to drive. There's the knowledge of knowing how to drive, and that there's also the wisdom, you know, be aware of your surroundings, you know, and be on the lookout. Don't have tunnel vision where you're not seeing what's going on over here. So there's the knowledge of knowing how to drive, the mechanics of it, the process, but then there's also the wisdom of being aware of your surroundings. Right. Some things you just can't prevent. It's going to black out. It's you know, you just got to deal with it. Verse 11. A serpent may bite when it is not charmed. The babbler is no different. It's kind of humorous there. The babbler is one that talks too much. Solomon speaks a lot about our use of our language and how that we could say things and talk too much, use our words too much. Verse 12, the words of a wise man's mouth are gracious, but the lips of a fool shall swallow him up. The words of his mouth begin with foolishness, and the end of his talk is raving madness. A fool also multiplies words. No man knows what is to be. Who can tell him what will be after him? The labor of fools wearies them, for they do not even know how to go to the city. So again, the problem of our speech there in verse 12, the words of a man's mouth are gracious. What's it say in the New Testament about our speech being seasoned with salt? Where's that verse? Colossians 4. I knew it was either Ephesians or Colossians. Colossians 4, 6. Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. So, speaking wisely. But the lips of a fool shall swallow him up. Where do we get the phrase, he stuck his foot in his mouth? That concept there is from the Bible. Open mouth, insert foot. He said some things that were foolish. It's from the Bible. He swallows himself up. Yes? Proverbs 10:32. The lips of the righteous know what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked what is perverse. Very good. That goes along with it. I mean, there's a lot in Proverbs that deal with the tongue and our speech and our words and how we need to think before we speak, be slow to speak, and think things through before we open our mouth. And verse 13 of Ecclesiastes 10, verse 13, the words of his mouth begin with foolishness and end with his talk is raving madness. So it escalates. It escalates into something worse when a fool is talking. Matthew 12. Exactly. Brood of vipers, Matthew 12, 34 through 37. How can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. And he uses the word vipers there, snakes or serpents. It's the same concept found there in Ecclesiastes chapter 10. Because where is the poison of a snake? In its mouth. Well, our speech, our words can be poisonous. You brood of vipers, how can you being evil speak any good thing? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good things. An evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart brings forth evil things. But I say to you that every idle word, that word means careless. Careless would be a better translation than idle. Every careless word men may speak, they will give an account of in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. That's how serious we should take our speech. Because it will either condemn us or justify us before God. There's justifiable speech. There's words that are right, and then there are words that will condemn us. And sometimes we say too much when we ought not to say hardly anything at all or nothing at all. Ecclesiastes 10 and verse 14, a fool also multiplies words. Saying too much. I mean, we've all been there. We've all done that. Speaking too much when we should have been silent.
You're saying that, based on Christians, that if we were like good officials and men, we had a lot of foolish people that just would continue on and talking and talking and talking. These verses can remind me of that.
Right.
Get into heavy debates with a fool.
Right. Right. If you're trying to study with someone and you can't hardly get a word in edgewise, that person's not one of those good candidates for a study, because they don't want to listen. Right.
They have to, you know, their own pride. They can meet their own words.
Right. I mean, it's one of those things where you let a person talk enough that sometimes they will, you know, you give a person enough rope, they'll hang themselves. That concept. There's that problem. Now.
Robert just said,
Mm-hmm.
Psalm 35, verse 11 and 12.
Psalm 35. Psalm 35, 11 and 12. Fierce witness rise up. They ask me things that I do not know. Is that one you're talking about? In verse 12, they reward me evil for good to the sorrow of my soul. So, there could be some problems. Now, I'm going to step on my own toes on this one. How does this affect social media? Facebook, Twitter, Facebook. I don't tweet, by the way. I'm only on Facebook. But social media and what we say and how things can escalate, we got to be very careful. Because you're not there with the person, you're not hearing inflection, you're not interacting. A lot of communication is visual too. So it can turn into something bad quickly. And I've been guilty of it. And we just got to be very careful about how we use our words on social media. And we don't want to become fools and use a multiply our words in foolishness.
John, it's interesting you say that. In school, I went through speech classes, and also for work, I went through communication classes. Both of them, percentages were a little off, but both of them, they were still consistent saying that with communication, somewhere around the 60% range is nonverbal. So
Right.
our nonverbal cues actually speak more than words that we say.
Exactly. The one-on-one speaking to one another is very important. Verses 16 through 20, we only have a few more minutes. And Solomon says, woe to you, O land, when your king is a child and your prince feast in the morning. Blessed are you, O land, when your king is the son of nobles and the princes feast at the proper time for strength and not for drunkenness. Verse 16 and 17 is very interesting. When your leaders are childish, that's a problem in a nation. The princes feast in the morning. Feasts don't normally take place in the morning. That's an improper thing to do. When your land is a child, they're childlike. A wise leadership, verse 17, is a king who's the son of nobles. They're dignified, and your princes feast at the proper time. There's a time and place for it, for strength and not for drunkenness. Their feasting is not to get drunk, but to strengthen bonds with one another. And so, I mean, there's a lot of applying that in the real world as far as rulers are concerned. Verse 18, because of laziness the building decays, and through idleness of hands the house leaks. Pretty practical. You don't do maintenance, you're lazy, you're going to have problems with your house. The building will decay, the house will leak. Verse 19, a feast is made for laughter, and wine makes merry, but money answers everything. So money being the answer to everything in people's minds is a concept there. Verse 20, do not curse the king, even in your thought. Do not curse the rich, even in your bedroom, for a bird of the air may carry your voice, and a bird in flight may tell the matter. You ever heard the expression, a little birdie told me about that? From the Bible. The concept of messages carry. They get carried, and they sometimes will get to the person that you're cursing. And so it says, don't do that. Don't let that come forth, because it can be detrimental to yourself if you're cursing the king. So practical things that are found here in chapter 10. Now next week, Lord willing, we'll go into chapter 11. We'll talk about some more practical things and something that I was made aware of in studying this, how chapter 11, verse 5 through chapter 12 deals with the whole process of life from the womb to old age, and talks about the youth and our attitude as we should have as young people, remembering our Creator in the days of our youth. So that's going to be a very good study there in chapter 11 and 12.